This crazy project would never have seen the light of day without the enclosure dam completed in 1932. The dam created a lake, which allowed the Dutch to polderize areas of fresh water and thus create new land. But this reclaimed land is particularly vulnerable to flooding, and its inhabitants must live with that threat. The province of Flevoland is located at between 6 and 14 meters below sea level. The soil is fragile, and constant tides in the rivers make the risk of flooding a little greater every day.
Paradoxically, the cities most at risk are not exposed to the sea, but further inland. And then a city very much at risk is Lelystad, that actually is in a deep polder in an area that used to be part of the sea, but now is an inner lake thanks to a closure with a 30-kilometer long dike.
Lelystad is just 60 kilometers from Amsterdam, and the historic capital and the new city have something in common: the fragility of the soil. Amsterdam is located on swampy soil composed of soft peat and clay. This soil is a real challenge for architects. As far back as the 17th century, they had to find a way to make the foundations of the houses, designed in the typical Flemish style, hold firm in the ground. All buildings in Amsterdam are built on piles with wooden stakes. But to reach the first stable layer of solid sand, it was necessary to drill down to a depth of more than 11 meters, the equivalent of a 4-story building.
So every house you see, you have the house, you have the stilts underneath it, is put on stilts. And for example, if you go to the center of Amsterdam, there's a big palace. And underneath that palace, there is, I think, 13,000 piles of 20 meters holding up one building. So the most dense forest of Holland is underneath one building.
This underwater forest supports houses built on cob, a mixture of clay and straw. Designed to be submerged, this traditional material is very robust as long as it is not exposed to variations between air and water. But in recent years, traditional Amsterdam homes have been facing a new challenge brought about by global warming. This time, it is no longer flooding that threatens them. It's drought, which poses a danger to their foundations. This is a new phenomenon for this northern European capital. In recent years, the city has experienced long periods of drought and heat that make the water levels in the canals fall, exposing the cob to the open air, making it dry out and crumble. Then, when the water rises during the winter, it seeps in and eats away at the foundations. The historic center of Amsterdam is now facing a new risk, that of collapse.
Holland is artificial, it's fake, and the people at the water board, they can manage to bring water up and down. Same if you're a DJ, you can also tune the music and make the rhythm and the sound and the light go out. That's how we also work with Holland. So if we have water storage areas, then if there's too much water, we bring the water to the water storage area, and by that the water level in Amsterdam stays the same. If there's a lot of dry, we bring water from the water storage areas back into the water. So then still we have the same level. So the challenge is how to keep your water level always stable.
Controlling the water, monitoring the level, and keeping it at a distance so it doesn't engulf the country. The Dutch have been fighting against water for centuries. But there is one danger that nobody can be fully protected against: storms. Winters in the Netherlands always bring storms. The combination of very high winds and the North Sea at its highest level brings a real threat of flooding. The fear of seeing waves of icy, muddy water breaking on the coast is in everyone's minds. Every year, behind the dykes, they prepare themselves for the worst. And the worst happened to the Dutch on the night of the 31st of January, 1953. During this terrifying night, the province of Zeeland on the southern coast of the North Sea was battered by one of the most terrible storms Europe has ever seen. A combination of 160 kilometers an hour winds, excessively high tides, and a powerful depression from the northwest sent the water up to an exceptional height.
Mankind has accomplished some absolutely incredible technical and technological feats. And we forget, when we talk about water, that water is so much more powerful.
You cannot tell it enough how the power is of the water, and you should be afraid of that.
Water shapes entire valleys and erodes everything in its path when it wants to. No matter how much technology you bring to it, it will always find a way. So it's up to you in the end not to get in its way.
The phenomenon of coastal flooding begins away from the coast. Tons of water are lifted up by gusts of wind to crash down on inhabited land. Because the Netherlands are located in a delta where rivers meet the sea, they are extremely vulnerable.
So if you think of the map of the North Sea and the wind from the north, you see that it goes into a funnel. So the water levels are pushed up, and this can lead to water levels that are 4 meters higher than the average sea level.
The wind drove a huge amount of water inland, and the water rose in the houses with incredible speed.
The water came so high that my father decided we should go on top of the roof. We know people who have saved their lives. They put out the tiles of the roof, and on the wooden construction, they were floating.
In the early morning of the 1st of February 1953, the storm-stricken region of Zeeland woke up to utter devastation. The disastrous consequences of this high tide traumatized the entire country. There were more than 1,800 dead, 100,000 homeless, and 160,000 hectares of land flooded. Once again, Amsterdam was spared, but the country was forever marked. Despite the fact that these events were caused by natural phenomena, the consequences of the high water were linked to human construction. The Netherlands' ingenious network of dykes, built up over the years, broke in 89 places.
The important thing to understand is that protection is never total.
But if the Netherlands can never be totally protected, to what extent can Amsterdam be saved? After the Great Storm of 1953, the Dutch had no choice. They declared war on water. To wage this war, they set out a military strategy known as the Delta Plan. This plan described all the major works to be carried out to block the path of the water.
The fight against water is perhaps one of the major themes in the collective image that we have of the Netherlands.
Their main weapons were barrages, dams of unrivaled power and dykes that were stronger and higher than ever seen before. At every point of entry, the water would come up against the military force of these superstructures. The safety of the 18 million Dutch people who live behind them depends on it.
The most important thing was to be able to live here. First, they built the dykes to protect the fields, then they built the dykes to protect the people who lived behind them. So in 1953, they thought it was normal to spend up to 3% of GDP on these major projects.